All right. Welcome, everybody, to Inside the Birds TV with Geoff, Mosher, and Adam Caplan, presented, of course, by DraftKings Sportsbook, America's top-rated sportsbook app. Now, anytime we get a chance to have a former GM on this show, you know we're going to jump all over it. So today we welcome to the show former Vikings general manager Rick Spielman. He's also been a former Dolphins general manager. And Rick, while you don't have any direct ties to the Eagles, our viewers certainly know that there have been several storylines between the Vikings and the Eagles over the past few years, from trades to obviously the 2017 conference championship game, the NFL draft. So we really appreciate you coming on today, giving us a little insight on some Eagles-Vikings history. And we'll also talk about the offseason from a general manager's perspective. This is now roster building time for the Eagles and every other NFL team, except for the two that are still playing. So I appreciate it, man. Thanks for joining us. How you doing these days?
Good. Thanks for having me on. And I do have to admit that I became very close friends with Howie Roseman with all the dealings we've had over the years, and have the utmost respect for everything that he does and how long his tenure has been going with the Philadelphia Eagles and gutting through the ups and downs, but did a phenomenal job putting that roster together. And I know they got a lot of draft picks coming up this year, and I'm excited to see what him and his staff do as they move forward.
Yeah, we're going to get into this with you. I think you're the perfect person to have on this show because while you were Vikings general manager, I believe there was a year that you had 3 first-round picks like the Eagles do this year, and then you had a couple of other years where you had at least 2 first-round picks. So you have a lot of experience in, and we'll get into that, like just the expectations. I think they're always heightened when you have that many first-round picks, and then the hit percentage expected and everything like that. But I just want to start it off. I mean, you've been in the game for so long. Right now, you're a free agent. What is it like? Everybody right now is usually in, draft meetings and personnel meetings and trying to figure out if they have to replace guys or hire guys. And what has the last, 24, 48 hours, last week been like for you?
Yeah, it's the first time I've ever had downtime this time of year. And it's hard to stop from going 100 miles an hour. Then all of a sudden you're 0. And that takes some adjusting. But when you start looking back, and we were able to go down to Florida for a week, me and my wife, just to get away and relax a little bit, it's like you don't realize how at some point you start to get burned out until you actually stop. And for me to say that I played a couple rounds of golf in Florida in January, that's never happened. And it was kind of refreshing, to be honest with you. And to come on and do shows like this, which I'm very privileged to be a part of today, it's been enjoyable for me. And I really enjoy just answering questions and things that I've experienced and try to share it with the fans.
Rick, a lot of people don't realize this. We know how great your brother was as a football player. Chris was a middle linebacker, but in just doing research on your career, I forgot that you were, correct me if I'm wrong, were you down in Chargers camp after you were done with school?
I was in the Chargers camp, got released, and then I signed with the Detroit Lions. I did not go during the strike year. I did not go across the strike lines. I was in grad school finishing up my master's degree at Ohio State, and then the Detroit Lions signed me. And then that draft, that spring, they ended up drafting my brother. So it was probably one of the greatest experiences of my life to say that, hey, me and my brother were roommates together and actually went through an NFL training camp together on the same team. Now, he got hurt during that training camp, and I had to take all the reps, and I must have lost about 20 pounds because back in those days, you went 2 times a day, full pads, and you're lucky to get a drink of water in between and taking the salt tablets back in sports science days in the 80s. But we always kidded each other. I kept him fresh for his rookie season, why he had such a great season.
Just one follow up on that. When did you get the scouting bug off of, like, okay, so you were UDFA, you were briefly in the NFL, but when did you get the scouting bug, or was it even before you became a player?
No, it was. I always wanted. We grew up in Canton, Ohio. In fact, our house was 4 blocks away from the Hall of Fame. So for holidays, me and my brother would go shop at the Hall of Fame. I'd get wristbands, he'd get wristbands, whatever. That was our exchange. So, and my dad was a high school football coach. So ever since we were able to walk, since we've been 2 years old, my mother would drop us off at the high school field as soon as the practice started, and that's all we were around. So it was a little bit of a long story, but I'll try to shorten it here real quick. Is when I got cut, I finished my master's degree at Ohio State, and I was working as a pseudo assistant athletic director at a junior college. And Blesto, which is a combine service at the time, and there was no internet at that time, had asked me if I wanted to drive to Cincinnati from Columbus every time they had a home game, write reports, do depth charts, send it to the Blesto organization, Jack Butler at the time out of Pittsburgh, and then he would distribute those to all the Blesto teams, which I believe there were 9 at the time, as part of the Blesto Combine. So I went down for my first game, and I fell in love with it. Just sitting there, it was the Ickey Woods Shuffle, Boomer Esiason, Anthony Munoz. It was, and all of a sudden, and I don't know what happens in life, but when you hit a path and for whatever direction you go to, and all of a sudden something's like, this is what I really enjoy and what I really want to do. Unfortunately, for me, it was fortunate. Unfortunate for my wife is when I saw her, told her I was going to marry you. She thought I was crazier than hell. And then 4 years later, when we graduated, we got married. So there's just something that we all experience as human beings.
An evaluator.
Yeah, that something hits you and says, yes, this is it.
Oh, that's great. You got that scouting touch to you right early. Let me ask you something very Eagles oriented, but also Vikings oriented. Jonathan Gannon, defensive coordinator, just finished his first year with the Eagles. You have familiarity with him. Obviously, he came over from being on Mike Zimmer's staff. What do you know about John that maybe the fans didn't get a chance to see this year? The defense finished with decent rankings, but anytime the Eagles played a decent quarterback, they were picked apart pretty badly, and this city loves those blitzers and hard, the Buddy Ryan types, and his philosophy, at least this past year, was a little bit different as far as pressure. So what do you know about Jonathan Gannon, and give me kind of your scouting profile on him?
Yeah, I remember when we were in our facility at Winter Park, which was maybe one of the oldest facilities at the time. He was in a small office right outside the head coach's office. And I remember how much he learned from Coach Zimmer, because I think Coach Zimmer is a brilliant defensive mind, and always felt that as a young coach and how hard he worked, and I'd be leaving at 8 or 9 at night and he'd still be in there drawing cards. And you could tell how much passion he had to be a coach, and you could tell his presence, even though he was in an assistant position, just relating to the players. And I think as he had moved on in his career, he started, I think they hired him from Indianapolis, that he had picked up, just like we all pick up as we progress through our careers. You pick up little tidbits from here, little tidbits from here, and eventually you come up with your own scheme. But I think he is an outstanding young defensive-minded coach with a great presence, very knowledgeable. And I think as he continues to grow, because this was his first year as a defensive coordinator, as he continues to grow and get more confident in this position, I think he's going to be an outstanding coach in the NFL.
Are you able to tell what kind of scheme he ideally would like to run? Is it going to look something more like Mike's, or maybe more like something that Indianapolis had with when Matt Eberflus was there?
One thing I know about Jonathan is that as he learns his personnel and what they can and can't do, and always identified a great coach by looking at what type of athlete you're working with and how can I, as a coach, adjust the scheme so this gives this player the best opportunity to be successful on the field. So you can have your building block or your base scheme, but a lot of these coaches, and you see it with Bill Belichick all the time, I think they started out in more of a man defense or switched to a zone this year. And all of a sudden, they took off, and that turned their season around. So the type of coaches out there that can adjust their scheme to fit the personnel they have. And I'm sure, with the draft coming up, they'll start drafting more specific players to fit the scheme that he wants to run. But for the first time coming in with a new staff, and you can't just wipe out everybody on the team and just say, I want all new players here. Let me see what each of these guys' skill set is, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, and let's try to apply our scheme and adjust our scheme so it gives us the best chance to win on Sunday.
Rick, off of that, Geoff and I talk on our show, we do this every year, about how the Eagles resources simply do not go at linebacker. Now, we look at the way you built your roster. It's hard to argue with Eric Kendricks, who might be a Hall of Famer someday. He's that good. I don't know if he gets there, but he might be in the conversation. Anthony Barr is a specific type of linebacker. I know talking to Zimmer over the years, he liked guys who had length at certain positions. But the Eagles don't, in resource in terms of cash allocation, draft picks, they simply don't take guys high. Was your philosophy, whether you're with the Dolphins or the Vikings, wherever you'd been, did you believe you had to spend on linebacker, or you said, okay, it depends what the coach wants, or both?
I think it was a combination of both. When Coach Zimmer took over down there, it was a totally different defensive philosophy and defensive scheme, and it doesn't happen overnight. It takes a couple of drafts to get to bring in those type of players, or signing a free agent that may fit what the scheme is. So that evolves over time. I knew, when we drafted Anthony Barr in the first round, Coach Zimmer, we all sat in there, including our scouts, and we were going through our draft process. He said, this is how I'm going to use Anthony Barr, and this is why he's going to fit this scheme. So as a personnel department, you can line up the board. You can put the players where you think their value is on the board, but you have to have the coaches involved, because you have to marry up the personnel with the scheme. And eventually, as you continue to draft and you're drafting with that coaching staff, you're filling those needs that way with a specific skill set that they're looking for. Because if you draft a player that doesn't fit the scheme, he's probably not going to be as successful as if he goes to another team that fits his skill set.
Let's talk about the draft from a couple of years ago, Rick, because it's still a sore spot here in Philadelphia. Obviously, the Eagles took Jalen Reagor. You guys were up next, took Justin Jefferson. We all know what's happened since. But I kind of more interested in going back into the scouting and the evaluation part of it. I imagine as you were sitting there and the draft's going down, you knew a couple of different receivers. Those two guys, maybe even Brandon Ayuk, were going to be in that mix. How did you scout them? How did you see everybody in that cluster, and what ultimately made you decide on Justin?
Yeah, no, we spent a lot of time on that receiver position, and I got to see Reagor play down live at a TCU game that I had attended. There was no question about his skill set, his physical traits, his speed. The one thing that was really intriguing is that he added value as a kickoff and punt returner as well. So when you're sitting there and you're in those meetings and you're discussing these players, the one thing that came up was, how many times is this guy going to be able to touch the ball? So if he's maybe getting 4 or 5 catches a game, but also is a dynamic returner that is going to have another 2, 3, 4 touches that way, then he can have an effect on a game. And I wouldn't say that kid's a bust. I think there's still a lot of room to grow with him. And some guys, you have to remember, hit it earlier than other guys. Some guys take 2 or 3 years to hit. I remember we took KJ Osborne last year. He couldn't get on the field. He dropped punts, and all of a sudden something clicked in him his second year, and he became a viable, especially when we lost Adam Thielen. He made so many big plays for us this year and became a viable receiver that I think has a bright future in the NFL. So it's a very hard decision, especially we had all those 3 together, and we had numerous discussions, I would say numerous hours of discussions going through film study. And Brandon Ayuk and JC kid who transferred to Arizona State, and you saw his natural athletic skills, but he wasn't as polished of a receiver as maybe a Justin Jefferson was or a Reagor was at the time. And then when you looked at Justin Jefferson, okay, he had just played in a slot, I believe, his senior year. He had to go back to his junior year to see if he can line up outside. And he was overshadowed by another pretty good receiver that's playing in Cincinnati right now. I think his name is Jamar Chase. So, so how does that all translate? A lot of it is a little bit, you can do as much research as you can, the analytics, all the background, all the sources that you talk to, and it's a little bit luck involved too, because you can predict what may happen, but until they get up here and actually do it, and you see them flourish, like we're seeing Justin Jefferson doing now, that's when you can say, yeah, no, we made a pretty good pick. But I've also missed on a receiver too a few years back where it didn't turn out like we wanted it to.
I want to stay on that guy. Geoff loves Laquan Treadwell, who's revived his career. You brought it up.
I was going to bring it up. I was going to bring it up.
You brought it up. All right. So now he's doing well right now. He had to play. We'll see what happens with him with the Jaguars. But you brought it up. So why does it work? And then, by the way, with Jefferson, Geoff and I talked to teams before the draft and after the draft. There were a lot of teams were not sure if he could play inside and outside. Let's stay with Jefferson. We'll get to Treadwell later. But why did you think he could do both, not just the slot?
I think when we went down and we weren't able to work him out because we were in COVID. So everybody, to be honest with you, that draft was going in a little blind on the normal process that you do. So that's where I said sometimes luck can be a little bit involved. But when we sit there and do our group studies and we saw his ability to get in and out of cuts, his ability, what I've talked about, the flexibility, where he doesn't have to slow down as he separates from a DB, his ability to contort his body, if that's a word, to go up and get balls that are off-target catches, and just the natural, what we call snatch and pluck out of midair, and then his acceleration after the catch. There was a lot of questions on Justin Jefferson. Is he going to be a 4.6 receiver? Because a lot of people didn't know how fast he was, and then he ran well enough that I think he ran in the high 4.4s for us when we got the results back. So the other receivers and the ones I missed, usually it wasn't because of something that they didn't want to be good. They didn't have great hands. And I'll get to the point here on Laquan Treadwell. He had great hands. He made some spectacular catches. Now, he was coming off a pretty significant ankle fracture that we were betting maybe a year or two away that he'd get back to where he was. And he may have had the best work ethic out of any receiver I've ever been around. I walked in our indoor practice facility at 8 at night, and he's catching tennis balls off the wall over his shoulder, trying to work out his hands and his coordination. But for whatever reason, he tried to press so much to be so great because of those expectations of being a first-round pick that it was almost pulling him back, that it was a detriment to him. And once he got that label off of him and just kind of – then he may end up growing into a pretty good receiver in this league. But some of the things that we try to identify is that these players, they get taken in the first round, in the media, the fans, they put them up here on such a pedestal that this is a savior of the franchise. And not all of them are all going to work out. And some of them can take that pressure. Some of them put such a burden on them to try to fulfill that I don't call it fantasy, that value where they were taken in the draft, that it just almost becomes a detriment instead of an asset.
So in that draft, if the Eagles had taken Justin Jefferson ahead of the Vikings would have then taken who?
One of the other two receivers. We like Reagor and we like Aiyuk. And the one thing that I noticed, because Aiyuk had such great speed when you broke him down on Arizona State. He was a playmaker. He caught the ball very natural. The thing that you noticed on the tape, and again, we were limited on what we can do, but he would line up to the same sideline that the Arizona State offense or the Arizona State team was on. So that was the way they were telling him the plays. So it was funny, and you saw that pattern as you kept evaluating that. Now, he was a JC kid. The question was, and once we got back all over our results, we knew he was going to be able to learn. But even in today, with all these kids coming out, not to go down another rabbit hole here, is that these coaches, you have to understand that all these kids aren't going to learn the same. So we felt once we interviewed him and did our phone interviews and our Zoom calls, that our coaches felt that a player like that may have some questions on how quickly he's going to pick up an NFL offense. Is he going to be just a one position guy? These are all the things that you're talking about when you're inside those draft meetings.
Right.
And then that's up, and I always put it on the onus on the coaches. You tell me whether he can learn this system or not. I don't have to coach him. But if he can't learn our system, or if it's fatal, then we're not going to take him. But if you can come in and say on the table that I believe this kid's going to be able to learn, it may take him some time. We have to teach him this way, not throw him a 50-page playbook and have him memorize it overnight. We're going to have to do some creative ways in order for him to understand what we're doing on the offensive side of the ball.
Adam, real quick. I mean, what Rick just said is very important for our show because, you know how fans can be very upset when guys don't live up to their billing, Rick. And for a while, we have said, even back to when they drafted Jalen Reagor, that this was not an overdraft, that he went in the area that a lot of people, Adam and I spoke to, pegged him for late first, early second, anywhere in that range. And you saying that if the Eagles had taken Justin Jefferson, that Reagor was on the table along with Ayuk there, just kind of confirms what we said, that there are a lot of things that have gone wrong here so far in the first 2 years. But as far as the Eagles making a pick that is so wild and crazy and bonkers, like people think, that's just not the case.
No, and you have to understand, draft's not an exact science. And the more we evolve with the analytics, with all the sports science, you're utilizing all these tools to try to help you make the best decision possible. And I learned this from the military. You try to minimize risk. And by utilizing all this new technology that's coming out, all these new testing that's coming out from a psychological to an intelligence side, all we're trying to do is try to minimize risk and make the best decision possible. But if you ever went back and looked at a study on first round picks, what is the percentage that you say a first round pick is a make or a hit? And I would bet you, and I don't have it in front of me, that it's about 50% whether these guys hit or not hit. So it's not an exact science. But the one thing I learned was, and again, from the military people that I worked with, was that we always did an action after review. So if we did miss on a player, why did we miss on him? Because we wanted to go back. Was it something we missed physically, emotionally, intelligence-wise, work ethic, passion for the game? What was it? So that when we got in the same situation again, that at that position, that this is how we're going to proceed forward. So hopefully we don't make or select another miss again.
So Rick, when you're scouting wide receivers, I know about you is you are analytical. You will obviously tape's big.
My wife says not, but I'm glad.
Well, really, because based on talking to you the last week, boy, you were reeling off a lot of stuff that is very deep. So
I try to reel that off in the house here, and she looks at me, and I get usually a shoe upside my head.
Okay, well,
you go do what the hell are you supposed to do?
All right, Mrs. S, we don't want Rick to get a shoe upside his head. So here's my question. Here's my question. When you not specifically any particular draft, but when you grade wide receivers, because I heard you talk with Bucky Brooks and Dan Jeremiah about this, but I would like you to expound on it. How do you grade that position? You had some terms I had not heard before about how you had had some type of intelligence test and some kind of testing, which I found very unique. If you could break that down for us.
Yeah, we used another test that we found very valuable, and I always relied on the analytics to verify whether it was good or not. So we had actually went down, and the psychological test that we were using would tell you about self-efficacy, effective commitment, coachability. They had maybe 10 different categories.
Mm.
And what we were able to evolve to was at each position, what one of these categories was the most important. So, for example, a running back and the number one thing out of this psychological testing may not be the same as a receiver. So when we looked at the receiver, besides the overall psychological and intelligence score, that combination, we talked about the dedication, the ability to want to get better, but the third thing, and not in any specific order, but really showed up was social maturity. And social maturity, the definition of social maturity is not getting in off-field situations was part of the criteria for social maturity, because there was another section, interpersonal style, which talks about leadership and how you interact with your teammates. But social maturity was something that we tried to measure on what's the risk of this player getting in trouble off the field. And the receivers that had high social maturity scores were the ones that were the most successful in the NFL.
Interesting stuff there. So along those lines, because we talk about this all the time, I'm curious how much you use advanced analytics for draft when you evaluate all draft prospects, not just the one you were talking about, but anything else that falls under the advanced analytics criteria.
Yeah, we developed our own analytics department, and we built everything in-house, just like our own IT system on how we operated. We thought it was very important that if you're able to have the people come in and build it in-house instead of buying something, and I don't want to call it at a box store, then you can make adjustments to those very easy. Mm-hmm. And so our analytics team started at square one. I said, just work with the physical test results that we're getting, hand length, arm size. Then the next year we layered in draft grades, coaches and scouts. Then the next year we layered in the psychological scores and the intelligence scores. So each year, because it doesn't happen overnight, you really have to build a large database in order to verify whether it's good or not, or whether the information you're getting is good or not. So it takes time, just like everything else, to build up that database so you can verify, hey, I think I'm going to be 85% right, that it's never going to be 100%. If that, then the computers would just draft. But you're always trying to, I think it's easy to identify the physical things. I think you're always trying to measure, and if there's a way to measure it, what's in that player's heart or what's in this player's head? Mm-hmm. What makes him tick? Because a lot of the misses that I've had, I fell in love with the athletic traits, but did he truly love and have a passion for the game of football? And when they don't, eventually that catches up with them and they get passed by. And then you see the opposite side, guys that are the Adam Thielens of the world that may not be as physically gifted. And we were very fortunate to find him at a tryout camp after the draft. But he had such a drive. Now, he had enough physical ability to play in the league, but his drive and his passion for this game was second to none. And even the greats, what makes him a Hall of Famer? There are very good football players that you can win with, but guys that have this and trying to measure that takes them to another level to why they're future Hall of Famers or will be in the Hall of Fame.
Rick, you'd mentioned to me when we talked earlier within the last week that analytics did find you guys some players. It's not like 500 players, and they would help you eliminate some things. Could you expound on that? Because I found it to be very interesting.
Yeah, this was where we thought, and I took a huge value. In the upper rounds, everybody's going to know who the players are. There's no secrets. No one has a player, what we call a rabbit hole player, where they just, it's a secret in a hole and you can pull them out at the end.
Sure.
Everybody knows who the good players are because of all the information out there that's being gathered now. Where analytics played a critical part for us is on our backboard, because we've graded 1,500 players a year. And you have your maybe 150 to 200 players on your front board that you want to draft. Then you have all these names on the backboard. And what analytics was able to do was to eliminate about 95% of those names, saying this guy does not have a chance. And if a guy pinged what we call on analytics, we may have only had one scout look at him. He may have been a summer grade because he didn't have a high enough grade from the combine, whether from National Scouting Service or the Bledsoe Scouting Service, where all the teams share the information initially so you can start your scouting process. But they would ping maybe 3 or 4 guys, sometimes 5 at each position, that we would automatically move them out of the boneyard, as we refer to it, and bring them back to life. And then we would have other scouts, and then we'd have coaches start looking at them. And all of a sudden, we would try to verify what the analytics was pinging and why they were pinging it.
Fascinating stuff.
Wasn't Thielen, hey, real quick, was Thielen part of that?
Thielen was a ping, but no one signed him after the draft. He was right down the street. And I've always said if I personally was smart enough to know how good he was going to be, I would have drafted him,
Right.
But we only had one grade on him at the time, down at Mankato State. And he was actually, his grade was, mixed in with the 15,000 other names we had on the backboard. Analytics was able to ping him. We looked at him. We said, hey, you're right down the street. Come up. He had gotten a couple other invites to go to other mini camps, rookie mini camps after the draft. He came up to ours first, and as soon as we saw him in that rookie mini camp, we signed him on the spot.
And the rest is history, as they say. That's amazing.
But he wasn't who he was when we signed him. He started out on the practice squad, and then all of a sudden he got elevated. Then he was a great special teams player. So we thought that maybe you got a 3rd, 4th, 5th type receiver that can go in and fill in and then help you win games on special teams. But then someone got hurt, and I can't recall who. He got his opportunity, had a great game, and then Wally pipped the guy that was in front.
Really?
And the rest was history.
Unbelievable. All right, Rick, I want to ask you a few Eagles-Vikings crossover questions. First, I want to remind everybody to download the DraftKings Sportsbook app. Use promo code ITB. Get 56-1 odds on either Super Bowl team. Bet just $5 and get $280 in free bets if your team wins using promo code ITB at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of Super Bowl 56. Got to be 21 or older. Pennsylvania only. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. So, all right. I'm wondering, 2017, the draft. You trade a 2 and a 4 to move up in the second round, up to number 41, 2 spots ahead of the Eagles to take Dalvin Cook. Were you thinking Eagles in your mind doing that you thought the Eagles would want Dalvin Cook? Did you have intel on that? And what did you see as far as getting him at that spot?
First point is, yes, we definitely wanted Dalvin Cook. And as we were sitting there, and Adrian Peterson, I think we had, at the time, had moved on from Adrian Peterson, and we knew how important the running game was to our offense. And Dalvin Cook, we thought, was a unique running back. And there was a lot of comparisons in that draft between Dalvin Cook and Joe Mixon, and going back and forth on those two. Then when Cincinnati, and we liked both those running backs. So when you're in that draft and you're sitting there and watching the board come off, all of a sudden Cincinnati takes Joe Mixon before we selected. So you always try to prepare for who's in front of you or who's behind you, and try to make a game plan on knowing their needs and where you have to manipulate in the draft, although it's guesstimating, just like coaches do every Sunday. They put together a game plan, they try to adjust. But we had such value for Dalvin Cook that we wanted to move up right after Joe Mixon was taken as far as we could to make sure that we were able to land Dalvin Cook.
And did you think the Eagles would have taken him there at that point? Because they were also kind of very
I was very upset that Howie didn't call me and let me know what he was thinking.
Well, sometimes GMs know this, though. They have an inclination. They need, sure.
There's so much that goes on before the draft and so much disinformation out there.
Smoke. Yeah.
And a lot of people will put disinformation out there just so it throws people off. I mean, that's the game within the game. But
did you ever do that?
I will plead the fifth.
I knew it. All right.
Well, you broke a lot of hearts that day in Philadelphia, certainly, right?
They wanted Dalvin Cook.
They wanted Dalvin. And then they had to settle, I think, for Donnell Pumphrey in the 4th round, which didn't work out very well.
And that 17 draft. So you mentioned Howie Roseman at the top of this. You've done a bunch of deals. Because I know from talking to people early in Howie's career, obviously he was new to the GM position. Then you grow into the position. He's a dealer. So here's a question for you. If Howie's calling you, are you expecting him? Does he want something? Does he want to make a deal? Is he just gathering information? Like, give us an idea of what it's like to deal with Howie on a phone call.
Yeah, Howie is very thorough. He really does his research. He wants to make sure that he's getting value too. I always took the approach is let it be a win-win for both clubs. I don't, if we're happy with the deal, similar to what we were able to do with the Stephon Diggs trade with the Buffalo Bills.
Yes.
Felt very strong that we were happy with the deal. They were happy with the deal. That worked out. But Howie is very good at what he does, especially when he's trying to trade or do things. And I know through my experience with Howie, he's not going to pull a deal or pull a trade that he doesn't think gives the Philadelphia Eagles value, which is a good thing. And I think that's why Howie is good at what he does and why he's been there with Philadelphia for so long.
Can you take us inside the trade in 2016 for Sam Bradford? Obviously, you guys had lost Teddy Bridgewater. You were expecting to be competitive that year, and so needed a quarterback. So how did it all come about? Who called who first? And
I was on the phone with a lot of people. First, it was, I believe, 8 days before the season opener. We felt we had a very good team. Teddy was going into his 3rd year, really starting to become, what we thought was going to be a really, really good NFL quarterback. And I'll never forget the day out there watching practice, and he pivoted around on a play action faking the ball to the halfback before he was going to throw. And as he pivoted, no one touched him and his knee snapped. And you go back and you think all you have done during that off season, your free agency, the draft, managing the cap, extending contracts, you have spent 6 months, 24/7, 7 days a week trying to build this roster. And like that, it's taken away by a freak accident. My philosophy was always I wanted to give our team the best chance to win no matter what. And the one thing I learned when I called all these GMs and we went through everyone who had a legit 2 quarterbacks on their roster, first question out of every GM's mouth was, boy, that's just feels so bad for you of what happened to Teddy. And second, yes, this quarterback can be available, but you're going to have to pay a premium. So
yeah, they felt really bad for you.
Sorry for us.
It's funny, Rick, that what you just said about feeling sorry for you, like they'll first, because if they're, especially I guess if you're friends with these guys or you know them socially over the years, but they're sharks, man. You would know better than I. Obviously, you're in the business. But I'm just talking to GMs and personnel directors over the years, like they feel bad for their friends, but they're like, hell, if they call us, the leverage is ours.
Right. So it's like the same thing. Do you think all these coaches aren't friends, but on Sunday they don't want to beat their friend?
Yeah.
Right. That's what this game is about. That's what this business is about. And after you've done business, you go out and you'll have a burger and a beer or a soda, as you guys say out. I call it pop, but
right, soda, right, really.
at the combine,
Sure.
and it's you have a lot of close friends, and because it's such a small circle that because you have to deal with each other, but also you're very competitive against each other, not only in the draft, but signing players, keeping players. That's all part of the business.
So you wound up calling Howie at some point, right? Was that the most attractive 2-quarterback situation that you felt?
I didn't know at the time, to be honest with you, where Wentz was in his development and how they were, because I don't believe there was preseason or I think I can't recall if Wentz would just played 1 or 2 preseason games.
Yeah, he got hurt. I think he had a hip rib injury, broken rib in the preseason. Yeah.
So I didn't have a feeling where Howie or Doug Peterson was on if they were even willing to trade a Sam Bradford, because Sam Bradford, out of all the teams that we called, was the best option, because Sam was a very good quarterback. He can throw the ball as good as anyone in the NFL. His biggest issue was the durability and the knees. And were we really willing to take a risk with that injury history of with his knee history? And because we had such a competitive team, that I, and talking with Coach Zimmer, talking with our ownership group, wanted to give us the best chance to win that year. I said, don't worry about the draft pick, because we have a pretty good history of manipulating draft picks and moving all around the board, and we'll recover from that. So we pulled the trigger on Sam, and Sam was ideal for us when he came in. And I believe in 2016, Sam was having a great year for us. I remember we opened up US Bank Stadium against Green Bay. He was outstanding that game. All of a sudden, we were 5-0 at the time before we came crossing over to your Philly connection, came into Philly, coming off a bye, and we got beat. And then that was when Norv Turner resigned in the middle of the season, and we ended up 8-8. Right. Although Sam performed very well for us. So leading into 17, I don't want to be the host of the show, so I'll sit back.
Keep going. No, we were going to go to 17.
Just to your point,
That's why I wanted to go.
Yeah, Sam led the NFL in completion percentage that year. I think it's 71%.
Correct. So we're going into 17. I know we have a very good football team. We have Sam Bradford as our quarterback. We signed Case Keenum as a backup, because we didn't know where Teddy was going to be ready. We kept Teddy on the roster, hoping that he would still recover from such a significant knee injury that he had. So Sam goes. We play the New Orleans Saints at home in our home opener, and I believe it was after we beat, I can't remember who we played first, but Sam was, I went back and looked this stat up, 27-32, 346 yards, 3 touchdowns, and we beat New Orleans. And then Sam hurt his knee that game. Mm-hmm. So we went to Pittsburgh the following week. Case got beat. Case ended up, I think we went to Chicago on a Monday night game. Sam tried to come back and play. He really struggled that first half. I know Coach Zimmer switched quarterbacks, and Case Keenum became the starter the second half. We ended up coming back and beating Chicago on Monday night that year. And then it was Case Keenum the rest of the way through, and ended up, 14-3 that year.
Wow. How do you know, Rick, when you see a guy like Case Keenum, and we obviously the Eagles got to a lesser extent Nick Foles in that season. Yeah, he had a great run late, but only for a couple games. But when you see a guy like Case Keenum play well above what anyone thought, was it hard to walk away from him after, if I'm not mistaken, I think he went to Denver after that. But when he plays a little like that, are you saying to yourself, is this real? Because you give the coaches credit, but I was shocked. It was incredible.
Yeah, no, those are the decisions that you're trying to determine in your off-season meetings. Now, the coaches are going to have a big influence on that. I mean, we can sit there and evaluate the tape, but they have a true understanding of, was this lightning in a bottle for a year, or is this sustainable? And Case had a great year, but we decided not to re-sign him that year. And because we lost in the championship game in Philadelphia that year, when we went through our meetings, Kirk Cousins was going to become an unrestricted free agent. And we felt that we had the number one defense, although I thought Doug Peterson and Nick Folk, they had a great game plan and just beat us during that championship game, and the rest is history from there. But if we can keep that defense together to play at the same level they played at, being the number one defense, and you throw Kirk Cousins in the mix and you have everybody back, then hopefully the thought process, and as we discussed it with the owners, that would get us to that championship game and to the Super Bowl.
Amazing. I want to go back a little bit, talk to you about draft and the ties here, because I mentioned when we opened up that you've had 3 first-round picks before. I forget the year, but it was 25, 29, and can't remember the third one. I know you took Cordero Patterson, Sharif Floyd, and Xavier Rhodes, although not in that order.
Right.
Philly guy, Sharif Floyd.
Yep.
So what was your mentality going into that draft? Are you just taking the 3 best players, or did you have where we can gamble on one because it's an extra pick? The concern about if you have 3 first-round picks, you have to pay them 3 years or 4 years from now, which is more than most. So what was your overall philosophy going into that?
The philosophy was, too, is you also had that 5th-year option. So that's, when we traded back into the first round for Teddy Bridgewater, that came into play. Well, if he ends up being a hit as a quarterback, that you're going to have that 5th-year option. I think it was the same thing when we traded back up to get a Harrison Smith. So that year, I knew we needed, I believe that was Coach Zimmer's first or second year. We had Xavier Rhodes, who fit I believe it was maybe before Zim came in, but we felt very strongly that he was one of the top corners, and we wanted to fill that need, and that's where it was developed on our board. Sharif Floyd, who had a great career down at Florida, was going to be a 3 technique, or the under defensive tackle. And for the fans out there, that's the defensive lineman where you see Aaron Donald line up every week and destroy people.
Right.
But Sharif was such a great kid, but he had such a significant knee injury as well that it ended up sidetracking his career and never was able to get back. And then we took Cordero Patterson. That was very interesting because I was down talking to the media about Xavier Rhodes and Sharif Floyd, and all of a sudden I'm at the podium and Bob Hagan, our PR director, comes, "Hey, they need you upstairs." So we went running. I went running back upstairs, left the press conference, and then all of a sudden we have an opportunity to get Cordero Patterson. And Cordero was another unique situation because he was a JC kid, not a very polished route runner, but just a freak athlete that was rare to find. And it's amazing what he's doing down in Atlanta now, because they found things that he does best and how they adjusted things to what he can do best. So, but those were the things. When you have those, again, there's no guarantees that all 3 are going to be significant picks. I mean, Cordero he was a Pro Bowler and an all NFL returner for us and won plenty of games that way. Bill Musgrave, when he was coaching them, did a phenomenal job doing some of the things that you're seeing they do with Deebo Samuel now, and what Kyle Shanahan's doing, running them sweeps, having them throw the ball, all kinds of things. And I thought Bill Musgrave was very creative with how he was using Cordero his rookie year, and Cordero had a heck of a rookie season that year.
Rick, it's Senior Bowl week, and this will be my 19th, and I love going. But how much value do you put in these All-Star games? Because it's really only 3 days of practice, and the last practice is pretty light. So do teams overvalue these All-Star games, and how do you value them as a GM?
Yeah, I think it's great to see guys, especially the small school kids, that go down there, because now you're seeing him against competition he's probably going to have to face in the NFL. So you like to see how those guys respond in that environment. I think the other big value we had was that it was really the first time that you get an opportunity to sit across from these kids and start your interview process. So you get to start to know them as people. You put some value into that game. You're trying to basically verify what you see or didn't see on tape. I remember when I was with the Chicago Bears, and when we drafted under Mark, I was working for Mark Hatley, God rest his soul at the time, and we watched Brian Urlacher down there that was a safety that moved to linebacker, and that the rest is history there. So that was a big lot that I remember back in the 90s when we were talking about Brian Urlacher. Well, let's look and see what he did, because it was a new position at the Senior Bowl. And a lot of times you're going to see guys that are going to line up at different spots, tackles that may line up at guard, pass rushers that had their hand out, all of a sudden they're working them as a stand-up 34 outside linebacker. Guys that, linebackers at the line of scrimmage, all of a sudden they're stacked or lined up 2 yards behind the line, because that's a whole different ball game when you're off the line of scrimmage as a linebacker. First time you may see these guys dropping in coverage. And the one thing that's valued with all of these all-star games, it's the last time you're actually going to see him compete in pads and in a football setting, because the rest is going to be the shorts and all the testing and all the skill drills. But this is the last competitive thing that you'll remember from this player in pads.
So along those lines, since you've been doing this for about last 30 years, if I'm not mistaken, save for 1 year in between Miami and Minnesota, right? About 15, 16 years ago, you've been doing this for quite a while, and now you're taking this year here. What's next step for Rick Spielman?
I don't know. Looking at opportunities, I'm getting old. I'm going to turn 60 this year. So it's, you're just weighing. I found out that, I enjoy doing this media stuff. Adam's been a huge help. Jerry G-Matt, as everybody knows him.
Jerry Madelon.
Has been a tremendous help. And I enjoy sitting there and talking about my experiences and hopefully teaching not only some of the media what actually happens on the inside, but also giving an inside view of what the fans don't see. And I really enjoy this part of it. I missed the draft. Yeah, that was my favorite part, getting prepared for the draft and manipulating the draft board and seeing how everything comes into place. But you just got to take a step back, and when you have put your entire heart and soul into this and given everything you've had, and all of a sudden, how much did you miss from your family? I try to get to every one of my kids' games as possible, but I have so blessed to have the wife I have, because she runs the house and she took care of everything because I was at work all the time. So to kind of get refreshed a little bit and actually, this work-life balance isn't that bad. And I had a few teams call, to be honest with you, and look at different opportunities. Do you want to come in and do some kind of senior consultant role? I don't know if I'm ready to jump in and be a general manager again, or if I want to continue potentially going down this path, because I really enjoy speaking of my experiences and teaching and hopefully giving some insight that you normally wouldn't get.
Well, Rick, you are free to come on Inside the Birds anytime you want. We really appreciate it. You've given us about
I love the
hour
word
here.
free that you put in front of it.
Yeah. Trust me, even if we could work something out, it's not going to compare to whatever you can do somewhere else.
Yeah.
So, but it's been great walking down memory lane with you. We're all getting old. We may have aged you a little bit with some of our questions about the 2017 season, because you guys were really good that year, really close.
Yeah,
just had to come through Philadelphia, and we all saw what happened there. It's but you've had a great career. We really appreciate you coming on with us, spreading the wisdom, and let's try to do it again sometime.
I really look forward to it. Thanks for having me on. It was fun.
Thank you.
You got it. Thank you. All right, everybody. That was former Vikings general manager. There he is, Rick Spielman, on the latest Inside the Birds TV. For Adam Caplan and Rick Spielman, I'm Geoff Mosher. Thanks for watching.